We are at the farm to investigate a couple of variables that will help us determine the difference between the wild environment the blueberries grow in, as well as the farm environment. We'll be measuring species requirements that differ between the farm and the wild environment, as well as species interactions that would differ between the farm and the wild environment.
Here we are at M&M Pacific Coast Farms. We spoke to farm manager Paul Gill and asked him a couple of questions before we took any measurements.
We went to the farm to learn about abiotic factors, as well as biotic factors, and Paul answered all our questions about the following factors and explained how they are controlled on the farm.
You control the light levels?
Well,
in the sun?
it's a good question, a good point. In our field, we really don't, but you can do it. It is done. You can do it in closed atmospheres, such as greenhouses. So people will actually go, and so they even do that, or they just use, instead of a full greenhouse structure, they can just use what they call cover crops. So there's plastic coverings, and some can just go for a single row, or you can do 3 rows at a time. And so with that, it can, in a sense, intensify the light if you need to accelerate the growth. Usually done early season in the spring, and that to get the crop gone a few weeks earlier than it normally would be. Or you can actually apply a shade cloth over top of it, and that actually slows it down, and you actually delay the harvest. So that. There are 3 big wind machines. So those are actually they're diesel powered. So they're big engines on them. They're actually designed to create wind. So they actually put more wind machines rather than to use the wind power to actually make wind. And the reason, so with that, that's actually a very good point. With that, we usually try to elevate the surface temperature. Because a little bit later, when the blossoms come out, usually in May and such, which is from the buds, they eventually goes to blossom stage and then fruit set. In the blossom stage, they really can't handle too much cold temperature. They really can't handle close to a freeze. What the wind machines do, they're able to draw in air from about 30 feet up down to the ground level. And the reason that warms up the soil, usually in May, late April, early May, we get what we call radiation frost. So you get a warm, clear day where it might go up to about 10 degrees Celsius, but on those clear nights with no clouds, that warm air will rise, and the cold air pours in, and it can literally drop down at nighttime to 0 degrees or -1, 2, and freeze and create an overnight frost, which can really damage those blossoms. So what the wind machines do, they'll fire up usually at that 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning when it's super cold, or the coldest temperature during that time, and they'll fire up and they draw in air from about 30, 40 feet up in the air, and they will bring it into the ground level and raise the ground temperature, or the air just above the ground, before 2 to 3 feet above ground, to that by 2-3 degrees. So that is that.
So that is one way. So, but like when you do that with the soil, does that change the height growth of the blueberries?
It won't change the growth of the plants, but it will basically prevents frost from forming on the blossoms, and then it will at that stage let the blossoms survive.
So, but can you control the height at all, or is it just like where you plant them? Because you don't want them too close.
Okay. Well, the typical planting, we usually keep about 10 feet in between the rows. We get our equipment through, and the plants are usually, historically they were spaced about 5 feet apart. Now we do about 34 to 36 inches apart. So you can control, and they start off pretty small. They start off about 12 to 16 inches high off the ground, and they will grow. So you can control it with a little bit of pruning, so you don't want the plants to become too big. In the perfect scenario, they're around 5 feet high and 3 to 4 feet.
Okay, because they all seem like regular.
They're
relatively.
They're in their range. These are mature plants, and then so you can sort of maintain this height or size just with pruning.
Is there any competition with the predators and stuff?
Well, there's a lot of competition with other pests, certainly. Predator-wise, in terms of other animals that consume the blueberries, Birds are the biggest,
Right.
predation. So birds will come in and feast on them and damage a lot of the berries. In some parts of even the lower mainland, mostly, and maybe north of the Fraser River, you had bears coming in and they will scavenge on them. In our area, it's mostly birds, sometimes some deers, but
We're also wondering, do you find that like when growing blueberries, did you find it hard, like if there's like other plants like weeds growing
Yeah.
with that?
Oh, totally.
It's just-
And that is something to really try to control. Like in the middle of the rows,
Yeah.
we can just mow it down. It's not too bad. But if you know
Okay.
some of the plants,
It's like a spacing.
we try to really suppress it. That's where you apply a lot of the fertilizers. So there are really good pre-emergent. The key thing instead of attacking the weeds once they get big is just try to control them when they're quite small. So we apply what we call pre-emergence. We'll probably do them in April, and that just helps control the weeds. We also apply, you can see some mulch and sawdust over
Yeah.
there, mulch over there. We usually put that in between the rows or underneath the plants, and that'll help suppress the weeds also.
Oh, okay.
So you do want to control it because
Can
because of two things, the weeds, well, multiple stuff. The weeds will compete for the nutrients in the soil
Right.
and the nutrients you apply and use that to grow. The weeds will also generally introduce other pests, insects and that kind of stuff.
Increasing the competition.
Yeah,
even more.
increase the competition. The weeds also can just sometimes even overtake the plant, so they can be
Right.
as big as the plant, so you can't even
Oh, no.
in terms of picking either by hand or by machines, you can't get in there.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have to keep them in a consistent moisture? Like,
Yeah, well, the two things in the winter, the spring, in the fall, winter, and spring, it's usually too much moisture. So you actually really trying to get the water out of the fields. So you actually try to have good drainage in the fields, get the water table down, so the roots aren't saturated. So you, in
So
a sense,
not-
sort of, so you don't want them just totally saturated.
Right.
In the summer, when you get dry, you want to have enough moisture there, so the plants stay active and healthy. So in the summer, usually about 6 to 8 week range, where we're actually applying some
Is that
water.
what the-
irrigation. Yeah, and so these are, you can see them. There's drip tape on the
Right
ground, and that drip tape on the black piping will help bring in water to.
After we asked Paul a couple questions, and he answered all of them, we took to the fields to measure the height of a couple of plants as well as the pH of the soil surrounding those plants.
So here we're measuring the height of the blueberry plant from base all the way to the highest stem. We're going to do this over a couple of plants until we get a bunch of consistent readings.
So right now we're just measuring the pH of each plant by sticking in this pH meter, and here it reads about 6.3, and it's just because it's a bit more saturated right now. Here's our table that shows the relationship between pH level and height in centimeters of the blueberry plants we collected at M&M Pacific Coast Farms. We collected about 10 plants on March 24th, and we measured using a pH probe and a measuring tape. The pH is higher than usual due to rainfall, which dilutes the pH to being more basic. The heights in pH are relatively consistent throughout the farm as well. Blueberries often grow best in acidic soils, and the average pH level collected at the farm berries were 6.65, and usually the average pH ranges from 4.2 to 5.2, but due to the excess water, it became diluted. And the average pH level for the wild berries is usually 6.0, and this is due to because the pH is not controlled and can be basic due to rainfalls and like less nutrients or the berries just absorbing less.
The moisture level on the farm can be controlled by irrigational equipment that is installed to allow watering to take place. These features are commonly used in the summer because the summers are much drier in British Columbia than the winters. Other than irrigational equipment, the berries mostly rely on rain, since BC rain is quite heavy, especially in the winter. The moisture levels were high the day that we went to the farm, which in turn affected the pH to be more diluted and neutral than the regular acidic range of 4.2 to 5.2. Moisture in the wild is fully dependent on weather conditions and the habitat in which the blueberries are growing. The blueberries will receive varying levels of water depending on the weather patterns and rainfall levels in the area that they are growing in.
Blueberries require a high level of light to grow tall and produce healthy vegetative structures. The light level on the farm is as high as the weather permits it to be, since there are no large trees or any other plants competing against the blueberries for sunlight, and the berries have also been spaced well apart to avoid the bushes competing intra-specifically on the farm. The only main coverage would be when clouds come. And as for the wild blueberry plants, light level received is variable and depends entirely on location and competition. Competition for sunlight can occur intraspecifically or intraspecifically. Other competing plants are the main problem as they often grow taller and completely cover the bushes. Other blueberry bushes also pose a threat, especially when growing close together.
Temperature is not as easily controlled as other things on the farm. In hot places, berries can be covered by shade nets to bring the temperature down, or alternatively, a greenhouse structure could be built to carefully control the temperature. The wind machines are used to regulate temperature on cooler nights by blowing warm upper air down onto the crops to increase soil surface temperature and prevent frost from accumulating on the plants. Blueberries in the wild will only grow in the temperature range that they are comfortable with, and this is clearly due to the fact that there is no artificial manipulation of the environment. The optimal range for blueberries in the wild is somewhat between 18 to 26 degrees Celsius.
The blueberry plants are very controlled by not only using pesticides for predators such as beavers and deers, but also propiconazole, which is a fungicide for early fungal growth in the crop. These sprays decrease interspecific competition with the crops. However, the most prone predator are birds, since they have larger range and mobility to take the blueberries and fly away. Furthermore, insects and weeds are also controlled from taking over the whole blueberry farm with timed sprays and regulate the blueberry crop's range and space. Some weeds still grow in the middle of each row, but they do not touch the crops, so they will not invade the plants. The biotic competition for wild berries are much higher than the farm blueberries because they don't have all the pesticides, sprays, and controlled environment. Instead, predators have free rein to eat the wild berries, as well as weeds and plants competing for space with the blueberries. Intraspecifically, the blueberries themselves will compete with each other for the best sunlight and just enough shading and isolation from predators. Because of the more species present, this will not only increase species interactions, but also the resource spectrum will be much larger. Due to all the factors that could harm the blueberries, this could also increase the dispersal rate to find a safer environment. Therefore, the fundamental niche is larger than the realized niche.
It is clear from our measurements on the farm, as well as the data and information provided to us by Paul, that the blueberry species requirements are carefully met on the farm. This is heavily contrasted to what we were able to research on wild blueberries, where they do not grow for optimum fruit production and often species requirements are not fully met.
In terms of competition on the farm, there is little to no intra-specific competition, and whilst there is a small amount of inter-specific competition, when it comes to weed growth, fungal diseases, pests, or animals, there is an attempt to control this, and blueberries in the wild have a much harder time dealing with competition than on the farm.